She pressed a damp cloth to his feverish brow by the flickering glow of the oil lamp. Outside, a vicious wind howled across the prairie, rattling the loose shutter on her cabin. She had no idea who he was, only that she had found him half dead on the trail, bleeding from a gunshot wound no decent soul could ignore. But now, with the morning light stretching long shadows across the dusty floorboards, she realized the terrifying truth. A stranger in a woman's bed was more dangerous than the storm she had braved to save him. And the townsfolk would not be merciful. The midday sun scorched the Oklahoma plains. Clara Hastings guided her tired mare Juniper down a rutted wagon trail toward her modest cabin. The earthy scent of approaching rain hung in the air, but Clara doubted the heavens would open soon enough to spare her from the heat. She was returning from the modest outpost of Broken Spur, where she had sold a few loaves of sourdough bread and jars of preserves at the local supply store. Folks in Broken Spur were always grateful for her homemade goods, though they barely had 2 nickels to rub together themselves. Dried brush and tumbleweed rolled across the arid land, a relentless gust of wind flinging them aside. Clara's bonnet struggled to stay on her head. She had a gentle smile beneath her dust-streaked face, determined to see the day's work through without complaint. Life on the frontier demanded no less. But as she guided Juniper around a bend in the trail, a flutter of movement in the tall grass snapped her from her wandering thoughts. At first she saw nothing but the shimmering haze of distant heat. Then a glint of light reflected off something metallic. Perhaps a belt buckle or a gun. Clara halted Juniper with a firm but gentle pull and peered more closely. Lying among the trampled weeds was the outline of a human body. Clara's heart thumped. Accidents were not uncommon in these parts. Stagecoaches overturned. Travelers fell victim to desperate bandits. But never before had she come across a wounded soul with no one else around. She dismounted, her calico dress gathering dust as she rushed forward. Sure enough, a young man hardly older than 30 clutched a blood-soaked bandana around his torso. His breath was shallow, eyes half-lidded. She knelt beside him. "Sir, can you hear me?" she whispered, her voice trembling. She quickly checked for a pulse. It was there, feeble but present. Relief and worry tangled in her stomach. He wore dusty chaps, boots caked in dried mud, and a vest riddled with bullet holes. She dared not yank his makeshift bandage away, just yet, uncertain of the extent of his injuries. The glint she'd seen came from a Colt revolver lying nearby. Its barrel shone in the harsh sun, a sign of recent firing. Clara darted her eyes across the plains. If there were attackers or bandits lurking about, she was defenseless. She took a breath, forced calm into her trembling hands, and decided she couldn't leave him to die. Folks around here could be hardened by survival, but Clara had never lost her humanity. She couldn't ride on as if nothing had happened. Gathering her courage, she removed the empty flour sacks from her saddle. Gingerly, she lifted the unconscious stranger with surprising strength fueled by adrenaline. The man groaned, but did not awaken. She settled him across Juniper's backside, mindful of causing him more pain. Her heart pounded, fearing he would die before she could get him to safety. As she rode toward her remote homestead, Clara had no idea that the choice to save him would set her down a dangerous path, a path lined with suspicion, anger, and the wrath of the very settlers she called neighbors. Clara's cabin was a humble structure she and her late husband had built with calloused hands and stubborn will. Now alone, she was the only soul keeping it upright. She laid the unconscious cowboy on her narrow bed, heart thudding as she examined the 2 bullet wounds, one near the rib cage, another deeper in his side. His skin burned with fever, his breathing shallow. With only whiskey herbs and rags, Clara set to work. She cleaned the blood as gently as she could, murmuring calm reassurances, even though the man was still unconscious. When she poured whiskey on the wound, he groaned and briefly woke in agony. "You're safe," she whispered. "But you've been shot. I'm going to help you." She sterilized her blade, and with trembling hands dug out the bullet lodged near his ribs. His muffled cries nearly broke her resolve, but she pressed on until she felt metal. When it was over, he passed out cold. Clara dressed the wounds with her homemade salves, packed them tightly with linen, and prayed it would be enough. Exhausted, she sat beside him, staring at the stranger she'd just fought to save. She didn't know his name, only that her choice to save him might soon cost her everything. Night cloaked the prairie as Clara watched over the wounded man by lamplight. His face, rugged and shadowed, bore a faint scar down one cheek. Who was he? And what danger followed him? She removed his gun belt and found the initials J.M. etched into the leather. Inside his vest, she discovered a note. "Round up by Fort Smith. Deliver by the 15th. Guaranteed." A hastily drawn star accompanied it. Perhaps a clue, perhaps a warning. Fort Smith meant Judge Parker's territory, known for harsh justice. For 2 days he drifted in and out of fevered dreams, muttering about betrayal, gold, and someone named Wilson. Clara listened, took notes in her mind, and continued nursing him with quiet determination. On the 3rd morning, his fever finally broke. He opened his eyes and rasped, "Thank you." When she asked his name, he replied, "Jake Morgan." She told him hers. From that moment, neither of them would be the same. Jake Morgan's strength returned at a steady pace. Within a week, he could sit upright and manage a few steps around the cabin. Clara's worry began to shift from the bullet wound to how the neighbors might react if they discovered an unknown man occupying her home. She lived on the outskirts of Broken Spur, but folks in a frontier town always made it their business to know what everyone else was doing. One hot afternoon, while Jake dozed, Clara was scrubbing her clothes in a bucket outside when the crunch of hooves on the rocky path made her heart skip. She squinted against the sun. A rider approached a tall figure wearing a wide-brimmed hat. As the stranger came closer, she recognized him. Pastor Elwood Hayes, the local preacher. He was known for traveling from homestead to homestead, inquiring about folks' spiritual needs and occasionally prying into their personal affairs. Clara stood wiping her hands on her apron. "Afternoon, Pastor." She greeted, forcing a polite smile. Pastor Hayes was a lean man with a stern face framed by wispy grey hair. "Good afternoon, Miss Hastings. I was passing through, thought I'd pay a visit. Haven't seen you in the chapel for quite some time." He dismounted, tying his horse to a post. "I've been busy," Clara replied, mind scrambling for a reason that wouldn't rouse suspicion. "The chores, the summer harvest. Time just slips away from me. But I'll be there again soon, I promise." His gaze flicked to the half-dry linens hung on a rope men's shirts, trousers. "You seem to have grown your household," he observed with a pointed stare. Clara felt a flicker of panic, but tried to stay composed. Well, yes. I took in a boarder," she finally stammered. "He was wounded. I couldn't just leave him." Pastor Hayes pursed his lips. "Noble of you, Miss Hastings. But you do realize that caring for a strange man, especially under your roof. Some folks might raise eyebrows." She swallowed hard, knowing too well how gossip in Broken Spur traveled like wind-blown sparks. "He was near death when I found him. It was the Christian thing to do." Pastor Hayes inclined his head. "Indeed. Nevertheless, I came to offer my prayers and see if you are in need of anything. The community is grateful for your bread and preserves, Miss Hastings, and we'd hate to see trouble befall you." Her cheeks flushed at the undertone in his voice. "Thank you for your concern, Pastor. But we're fine." He smiled, a thin-lipped gesture that did not reach his eyes. "Very well. Might I at least say a blessing?" Before she could respond, the cabin door creaked. Jake stood in the doorway, leaning heavily on the frame. Pastor Hayes's eyes swept over him, noting the bandage around his torso. The tension thickened. Pastor Clara said nervously, "This is Jake Morgan, the man I mentioned." Jake managed a polite nod. "Preacher," he greeted in a raspy voice. Pastor Hayes studied him intently. "Morgan, I trust you're recovering well under Miss Hastings' care." Jake gave a slight tilt of the head. "Yes, sir. She saved my life." Hayes merely grunted. "Thank the Lord for such mercy." A beat of silence passed before he turned back to Clara. "I'll keep you both in my prayers. Do consider attending Sunday's service, Miss Hastings. The community has missed your presence." With that, he mounted his horse and departed at a leisurely trot, leaving behind an uneasy stillness. Jake exhaled once Hayes was out of earshot. "He's suspicious. They'll all be suspicious," Clara murmured. She took the damp shirt from the bucket, her gaze fixed on the pastor's departing figure. "I just hope I haven't stirred up more trouble than I can handle." Jake said nothing, but a flicker of guilt crossed his face. He knew the trouble that rode with him was far from over. The days passed uneventfully, though the air felt thick with tension. Jake's color improved, and soon he began to test his strength outside, venturing a few steps to the well, always with Clara's watchful eye upon him. She noticed the way he patted Juniper's muzzle, showing a gentle nature that belied his rugged appearance. Yet she also noticed the restlessness in his posture, the glances at the horizon, as though expecting someone friend or foe to show up. Clara wanted answers, but she didn't want to push a man still recuperating. Finally, one evening, as the western sky flared pink and orange, she found Jake seated on a stump gazing at the dusty plains. She offered him a cup of tea and sat beside him. He sipped quietly. "I've taken up a lot of your time, Miss Hastings. Like I said, you needed help." Jake stared into his cup, swirling the liquid. "I was working a job." He began softly, guarding a stage, carrying a safe of gold bars. "We were supposed to travel from Texas up near Fort Smith, then cut west. Good money if done right." She tilted her head, bracing for more details. He let out a slow breath. Turns out the job was a setup. There were outlaws waiting in ambush men I'd never seen before, but they knew exactly where to strike. They slaughtered the driver, the shotgun guard. Everyone but me. I got off a few shots, but they overwhelmed me. I escaped, took a bullet to the side. Guess I'm luckier than the rest. Clara absorbed his words. "So, those outlaws might still be looking for you." He nodded gravely. "Chances are good. They'll tie up loose ends, and I'm a big loose end." She felt a chill, despite the warm night. "Is that note in your vest pocket about Fort Smith part of it?" Jake's expression darkened. "You found that?" She stiffened. "I didn't mean to pry." He waved away the apology. "Fort Smith is where I was hired. The star symbol was from the Pinkerton detective who recommended me for the job. I think someone sold out the route to the outlaws. It wasn't random. Clara swallowed. You should be telling the law about this. Jake gave a bitter laugh. Law? The nearest marshal is days away and half of them might be on the take. I'd trust a rattlesnake before trusting some of those men. Besides, I have no proof, no witness to confirm my story. Despite her moral compass, Clara understood the law could be a fickle ally on the frontier. So what will you do? I need to get to Fort Smith, he said. Try to find the Pinkerton contact. See if they can get to the bottom of who set us up. But first I need to be well enough to ride. He paused, searching Clara's face. I know I've brought danger to your door. When I can move on, I'll do so. I don't want to drag you into a fight not your own. Clara's pulse pounded. She believed him felt the sincerity in his voice, yet a flutter of fear stirred in her stomach. If the outlaws came looking, her life could be forfeit. But she banished that thought, resolved to see Jake healed, if only so he could find justice for those murdered on the stage. You can stay until you can ride, she said softly. Whatever trouble comes, I'll face it when it arrives. Jake bowed his head in gratitude. They sat there in silence, the prairie wind rustling the tall grass, forging a bond neither had asked for, but both silently acknowledged. Word travelled fast in Broken Spur, especially after Pastor Hayes's visit. Some settlers found any news involving the reclusive Clara Hastings downright irresistible. Whispers circulated about a strange man holed up with her. Speculations bloomed. Was he a criminal? A husband on the run? A paramour? Suspicion brewed in the hearts of those easily roused by rumor. One sweltering afternoon, Clara hitched Juniper to a post outside the mercantile. She needed flour and more bandages for Jake, who insisted he would repay her tenfold once able. Inside the mercantile's owner, Old Man Roberts was rearranging shelves. A small bell jangled as she entered. Afternoon, Miss Hastings Roberts said with an amiable nod, though his eyes flickered with curiosity. Afternoon, Clara replied, forcing a polite smile. She collected her supplies, trying to ignore the stares of two women near the back of the store, Mrs. Turner and Mrs. Beckley. Their hushed voices and glances in her direction were anything but subtle. At the counter, Roberts kept his tone low. I hear you're harboring a wounded man. Word is he's of questionable character. She squared her shoulders. He was shot and left for dead. I couldn't just ride away. Roberts shrugged, counting out her total. Your business, Miss Hastings, but folks have a way of letting talk shape their judgment rightly or not. Pastor Hayes has been telling folks you've let a stranger share your roof. People wonder if it's proper. Clara bristled. Is it proper to let a man die in the dirt? I did what was right. Roberts lifted both hands in a mollifying gesture. Now, I'm not disagreeing with you, but Broken Spur can be unforgiving. Watch yourself. She nodded stiffly, paid for her goods, and left. Outside, a few more curious faces lingered on the main street. Clara felt her cheeks burn, but she kept her head high. She loaded her supplies onto Juniper and led the horse away from the cluster of wagons. But no sooner had she left the store's view than a large figure blocked her path. Farnham Adams, a rancher built like an oak tree, infamous for a short temper. A wide grin split his face, though it lacked warmth. Miss Hastings, he drawled, hat tipped back, to reveal sweat-soaked hair. Heard you been keeping company with a drifter, someone who might be trouble. Clara's fingers tightened around Juniper's reins. Excuse me, Mr. Adams, I need to get home. He stepped closer, a menacing glint in his eyes. My cousin's stage was robbed last month near the Texas border. Lost a fortune in cargo. Heard there was one guard left alive. Some man named Morgan, rumored to be in cahoots with the robbers. Could that be your guest? A swirl of panic welled in Clara, but her voice remained cool. I don't believe so. He was wounded, yes, but I have no reason to think he's a thief. Adam snorted. You wouldn't know good sense if it bit you. Go in behind the good folks of Broken Spur, shacking up with an outlaw. His words dripped with contempt. Clara clenched her jaw. I won't stand here and listen to your accusations. Now step aside. He merely spat on the ground. Don't say I didn't warn you. When the truth comes out, and it always does, folks will see you for what you are, either a fool or an accomplice. She forced her way past, refusing to engage further. Her heart hammered as she realized just how quickly tongues could turn the entire town against her. If Farnham Adams suspected Jake of being an outlaw, how long until the rest demanded answers? Demanded retribution. Clara urged Juniper into a brisk trot out of Broken Spur, ignoring the eyes that followed her every move. As the plains stretched out before her, she prayed silently that Jake's injuries would heal faster, that he could leave before the situation escalated. Yet deep down, a soft ache suggested that his departure would cost her more than she cared to admit. Soon after Clara returned with supplies, she detailed her tense encounter with Farnham Adams to Jake. His jaw tensed as he listened. Though he had only known Clara briefly, he felt indebted to her for her kindness, her unwavering support. The last thing he wanted was to involve her in a blood feud with the locals. That evening, as Jake practiced walking outside the cabin, he caught sight of a rider cresting the distant hill. Alarm pricked his senses. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the land. Most neighbors would not casually drop by at this hour, especially not from that direction. Jake motioned to Clara, who stood by the corral. She followed his gaze, eyes narrowing. Without a word, she retrieved Jake's Colt from under the bed, handing it to him. She kept her old shotgun, inherited from her late husband, perched by the front door. Tension quivered in the air. Moments later, the rider came close enough for them to see a worn brown vest and a bandana pulled over his face. The man stopped about 50 yards from the cabin hand's taut horse, stomping anxiously. Jake stepped forward, wincing at the pull in his side, but determined to protect Clara. The rider lifted his bandana momentarily, revealing a sneer. He wore a scruffy beard and had a scar along his jaw. Without speaking, he raised a carbine and fired a shot into the air. Clara flinched. Jake gripped his Colt, but he knew better than to shoot outright. He had no cover, and it was uncertain how many others lurked beyond the ridge. A voice shouted across the open space. Jake Morgan, you're a dead man walking. The rider aimed his carbine at the cabin and let off another shot, this one splintering the edge of the front porch. Jake's breath caught. He raised his Colt, returning fire. The rider spurred his horse, ducking sideways. Jake's bullet tore through the rider's arm or shoulder. He let out a pained yelp, but remained mounted. With a final curse, the rider galloped away, disappearing into the dusky plains. Clara rushed to Jake's side. "Are you all right?" she gasped, checking him for further injuries. He exhaled, lowering the pistol. "I'm fine. He barely missed us." She gazed at the ragged hole in the porch column. "He knows your name. That means they've tracked you here." Jake nodded grimly. "I recognized him. One of the outlaws who ambushed the stage. Probably come to finish the job." Clara's pulse thundered. She realized how close they'd come to violence. "We need help," she whispered, thinking of the lack of reliable lawmen in the region. Jake weighed the options. He thought, if we ride to Broken Spur, Farnham Adams and his friends might just hand me over to the outlaws or string me up themselves. Clara set her jaw. "We'll have to stand our ground here until you can travel." Inside, they barricaded the windows with planks, just in case. Jake insisted on taking the night watch while Clara tried to rest. But sleep proved elusive for both. Outside, the wind moaned across the plains, carrying with it the promise of more danger. In the flickering lamplight, Jake contemplated whether he should depart before morning to spare Clara the wrath that might come knocking. Yet a swift departure could seal his fate. He was not fully recovered, and outrunning the outlaws in such a state was near impossible. He glanced at Clara's slumbering form by the cold hearth. Her face looked peaceful despite the tension in her heart. She had risked everything to save him, and now she was risking her reputation, her safety, and possibly her life. Jake knew he couldn't leave her to face the storm alone. If the outlaws came, he would stand beside her. It was the least he could do. A week passed without another direct attack. Jake's wound grew stronger, though not fully healed, and tension in Broken Spur rose to a fever pitch. Clara could sense it whenever she made her necessary trips for supplies. People stared openly, sometimes shaking their heads in disapproval or muttering cruel remarks. Someone had even painted harlot on the side of her fence in tar-like letters. Clara's heart broke, but she kept her chin high. Pastor Hayes delivered a stern sermon about the sanctity of a woman's virtue and the evils of harboring the wicked. Clara didn't attend that Sunday, but the message found its way to her ears. The following morning, while checking on her goats, a wagon rumbled up her path. She recognized Farnham Adams at the reins, flanked by 3 other men, Luther Barnes, Cyrus Tate, and Henry Crenshaw. Their expressions were stony, a dangerous glint in their eyes. Clara's pulse quickened. She clutched her shotgun, stepping protectively in front of the cabin door. Inside, Jake remained out of view, but surely he heard the commotion. Adams called out, voice booming. "Miss Hastings, we've come to settle this matter. We know that man inside is an outlaw. He's bringing trouble to our town." She took a deep breath. Jake Morgan isn't an outlaw. He was ambushed, shot, and left for dead. If anything, he's a victim. Luther Barnes, a wiry man with a bony face, spat. "We heard from travelers that a Jake Morgan was part of a stage robbery, an inside job. Innocent men died, and you're letting him hide here, tarnishing your name and ours." Clara didn't flinch. "It's not true. He's been recovering. He hasn't robbed anyone." Adam snorted. "We're taking him to the nearest judge. If he's innocent, he'll have his day. If he's guilty," Adams's eyes glittered dangerously, "he'll hang." A surge of fear and defiance coursed through Clara. "He's still wounded, and you have no right to barge in here, calling for a hanging." Henry Crenshaw, who rarely spoke, rumbled in a deep voice. "We want what's best for the town. Outlaws draw more outlaws. If you don't hand him over, we'll consider you a collaborator in his crimes." Terror clutched Clara's heart. The men advanced, dismounting from the wagon. Suddenly, Jake stepped out from the cabin, Colt in hand, but pointed at the ground. His face was set eyes cold. "You want me? Here I am. But you come one step closer, and you better be ready to pull those triggers." Adams and the others bristled hands hovering near their weapons. Clara's mind churned, searching for a way to defuse the standoff. "You think you're tough," Adams sneered. "4 men to your 1. We'll drag you to the gallows." Jake's jaw tightened. Might be so. But I won't go down without a fight. The tension crackled like lightning in the storm-laden sky. Clara found herself stepping between them, raising her free hand in a plea. If you kill each other right here, you'll be no better than outlaws yourselves. Let's talk this through. For a brief moment, the men glanced at one another uncertainly. Breaking the silence, Farnham Adams said, "Fine. Talk. But I suggest we do it at the Broken Spur Saloon, where the town can see justice done." Jake's lips pressed into a thin line. He glanced at Clara, silently weighing the risk. If he refused, the men might open fire. If he went, the entire town might lynch him. Yet running away now was impossible. "All right," Jake said slowly. "I'll come into town. But you guarantee me a fair hearing with the town elders. You try and jump straight to stringing me up, I'll take as many of you with me as I can." Adams scoffed. "Fine. We'll let you speak." Jake nodded. He took one step forward, but the movement tugged on his healing wound. Clara rushed to his side, worried. Farnham eyed them with thinly veiled disgust. The group made their way to the wagon, and Jake climbed in, Clara insisting on sitting beside him. Guns bristled around them, ensuring no escape. As the wagon rumbled away from Clara's homestead, dust kicked up behind them. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake Broken Spur to its foundation. By the time they reached Broken Spur, news had spread like wildfire. Men, women, and children emerged from shops, bunkhouses, and the smithy to watch Farnham Adams haul Jake Morgan and Clara Hastings to the saloon for an impromptu trial. The saloon was the only place in town large enough to hold so many curious spectators. Inside, the smell of whiskey, tobacco, and sweat hung thick in the air. Curious onlookers lined the walls. Clara recognized Pastor Hayes, Old Man Roberts, and a handful of ranchers. Across from them stood men hardened by frontier life, some with their arms crossed, scowling. The tension was palpable. Farnham Adams stood at a makeshift dais near the bar, face flushed with self-importance. Next to him was a tall, lean man with a mustache and cold eyes. Earl Timmons, the self-appointed peacekeeper in Broken Spur, since the official sheriff had died a year ago. Timmons was rumored to have no qualms about vigilante justice. Jake stood before them, defiant but pale from pain. Clara hovered close, ignoring the stares of condemnation. She refused to abandon him now. Pastor Hayes led a quick prayer for wisdom and truth, though it felt more like a formality than a sincere invocation. Finally, Farnham Adams boomed Jake Morgan. "You stand accused of conspiracy to commit robbery and murder. We have heard from travelers and rumors that you were involved in a stage ambush that left decent folks dead. Do you deny it?" Jake lifted his chin. "I do. I was hired to guard that stage. We were ambushed, yes, but I was betrayed. I was shot, left for dead. Miss Hastings saved my life." Adams banged his fist on the bar. "What proof do you offer? Some scrap of paper, you could have forged that." "We want a confession." Jake glared. "The only confession I've got is that I was a fool to trust the job's organizer." "I'm no thief." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Earl Timmons cast a skeptical glance. "Why did the outlaws leave you alive, Morgan? If you weren't part of their scheme, they'd kill you on the spot." Jake explained the shootout, how he managed to escape with a bullet wound. Some in the crowd seemed swayed by his earnest tone. Others looked unconvinced. Farnham Adams scoffed loudly, fueling the rising skepticism. Adams turned to Clara, who stood trembling, but resolute. "And you, Miss Hastings, have taken him into your bed." An outraged flush lit her cheeks. "He was dying, for heaven's sake," Pastor Hayes interjected in a hushed but stern voice. "We must consider the propriety, Miss Hastings." Clara's eyes flashed. "Propriety, is that more important than saving a life?" A wave of heat rose within her. She'd had enough of their judgment. The crowd murmured louder, some scowling at Clara's perceived brazenness, others looking unsure. Farnham Adams pressed, "You tarnish your reputation and the town's with such behavior. We all know you're a widow, but that doesn't give you license to shut your mouth." "Farnham," Jake snarled, stepping protectively in front of Clara. "You insult a woman who did what none of you would have." Adams bristled. "You dare speak to me like that? Outlaw, tension soared." Earl Timmons drew a revolver, slamming it down on the bar with a loud crack. The chatter died. "We ain't here to watch you two squabble." Timmons growled, eyes darting between Jake and Farnham. "We're here for the truth. Morgan, if you are innocent, prove it. Otherwise, I might just let Farnham string you up." Jake weighed his words. "If you allow me to reach Fort Smith, I can speak to the Pinkerton agent who hired me. He can vouch for my story." Adams shook his head. "That's days away. For all we know, you'll vanish on the trail." Clara took a bold step forward. "I'll accompany him to Fort Smith and see that he stands before the authorities. I'll testify on his behalf. If he runs, I'll return to face whatever blame you put on me." A shocked hush overtook the room. Jake whipped his head around, eyes wide with concern. Farnham Adams and Timmons exchanged a look, trying to gauge whether Clara's vow held weight. Pastor Hayes cleared his throat, glancing at the crowd. "Miss Hastings has always been an upright citizen. If she gives her word, that may be enough to ensure Morgan's compliance. But is the town willing to risk letting him ride out of here? Farnham." Adams spat on the floor. "I say we hold them both here until the circuit judge passes through." "But that could be months," Clara protested, voice strained. "And if the men who ambushed Jake find him locked up here, do you think they'll just let the town be? They'll burn it to the ground to kill him." A few ranchers paled at the notion. Earl Timmons narrowed his eyes, considering. If there was one thing the frontier taught, it was the harsh reality that outlaws might wage bloody war on a settlement to get what they wanted. Timmons loathed the idea of a siege. Finally, Timmons addressed Farnham. "Let them ride. If Morgan is telling the truth, no harm done. If not, we save ourselves from a gang war. Miss Hastings will be responsible for bringing him back if he's proven guilty." A maelstrom of emotions twisted in Clara's stomach. She had effectively tied her fate to Jake's. Farnham glowered, but a small nod from Pastor Hayes indicated reluctant acceptance. The murmur in the saloon grew, some folks outraged, others relieved to avoid immediate violence. Timmons pointed at Jake. "Don't you dare slip away in the night. We'll come after you, and if you get any ideas about double-crossing Miss Hastings, I'll personally see you hang." Jake returned the glare. "Understood." And just like that, a precarious agreement was formed. Clara and Jake would depart for Fort Smith at first light, carrying the hopes of proof for his innocence or condemnation. The crowd dispersed slowly, leaving a swirl of suspicion and resentment. Farnham Adams shot them one last look of contempt as he stormed out. Clara and Jake exchanged a long, weighted glance. Their fates were now entwined more tightly than either had foreseen. With dawn came the clatter of bridles and the soft snort of horses. Clara packed Essential's food bandages, a few changes of clothes, while Jake readied Juniper and a borrowed gelding offered begrudgingly by Timmons. The townsfolk hovered at the edges of Broken Spur's single street, watching in silence. Pastor Hayes stood by the chapel eyes, following them with a mix of concern and moral disapproval. Farnham Adams glowered from the blacksmith's awning arms, folded ready to pounce if Jake made the slightest misstep. Jake mounted with a wince, his jinkle still tender. Clara took the lead on Juniper, heading northeast toward Fort Smith. Timmons and 2 other men, Toby and Virgil, accompanied them for a few miles, before finally reining in their horses. Timmons scowled. "Remember Morgan. We'll be waiting to hear from that Pinkerton agent. If you don't show up with proof, we're coming for you." Jake nodded, reining the gelding to follow Clara. "We'll send word." And so they rode, leaving Broken Spur behind, crossing arid stretches of plains dotted with sparse, twisted mesquite trees. The journey would take several days, and they both knew the outlaws who ambushed the stage might still lurk. Clara set a steady pace, trying to conserve Jake's strength. As the day wore on, they spoke little, their minds heavy with the uncertain fate awaiting them. By nightfall, they found a rocky outcropping overlooking a ribbon of a creek, deciding to camp. Exhausted, Clara gathered firewood while Jake hunted for small game. He returned with 2 rabbits, which they roasted over a modest fire. The crackle of flames provided a semblance of comfort, even as they remained vigilant for any sign of trouble. Jake broke the silence. "You didn't have to do this, Clara. You could have let them have me." She stared into the flames, shoulders tense. "Let them hang you for a crime you didn't commit." "Never. I know the price of injustice. This frontier is cruel enough without us giving in to fear." He studied her face, noticing the flicker of old pain. "You've got a strong spirit. I'm grateful." She managed a small smile. "You were determined to protect me from Farnham's threats. I should be the one who's grateful." The air felt warmer, the tension momentarily easing. For a brief moment, they savored a fragile peace. A wolf howled in the distance, making them both glance into the darkness. Jake's hand instinctively drifted to his Colt. Clara checked the shotgun resting beside her. Despite the growing closeness between them, neither forgot that danger still lurked in the shadows. They were alone in the vast wilderness, with only each other to depend on. Eventually they settled to sleep, each keeping a silent watch in turns. The stars glimmered overhead, an indifferent canopy to the precarious journey unfolding below. Jake listened to Clara's soft breathing, mindful of what he owed her. Should they reach Fort Smith, he vowed not only to clear his name, but also to see she was protected, no matter the cost. A few days into their trek, the terrain became more rugged trees, sprouting in clusters near meandering streams. Clara and Jake had ridden hard, mindful of any riders behind them. The silent chase weighed on their nerves. They'd seen no sign of the outlaws, but that only made the quiet more ominous. On the morning of the 4th day, they broke camp early. Pink and orange streaked the sky as they mounted and continued onward. The faint call of birds accompanied the steady clip-clop of hooves. Suddenly, gunfire shattered the morning calm. Bullets whizzed past. Jake and Clara instinctively kicked their horses, racing for cover behind a rocky rise. Clara clutched the reins, heart hammering, while Jake fired a few return shots over his shoulder. Peering around the boulder, Clara glimpsed 3 riders. One was the scar-faced man who had threatened Jake at her homestead. They galloped closer, rifles aimed. Jake cursed under his breath. He and Clara dismounted, using the boulders as cover. The outlaws spread out, trying to flank them. Clara steadied her shotgun, adrenaline surging. She reminded herself these men would kill Jake, and likely her too. She fired as one rider came into view, the shotgun's roar echoing in the canyon. The man tumbled from his horse with a cry. Jake took aim with his Colt. His bullet struck another outlaw's shoulder, spinning him around in the saddle. The third man, scar-faced and enraged, fired back, hitting the rock near Clara's head. Shards of stone sprayed her cheek, drawing blood. Jake gritted his teeth, returning fire. He rushed to shield Clara as best he could, but she held her ground, shotgun at the ready. The wounded outlaws struggled, one falling back the other, continuing to shoot. Lead spat across the rocks, ricochets ringing out. In the fury, Scar-faced realized his men were outgunned. He spat curses and wheeled his horse, disappearing with the others. The thunder of hooves receded, leaving dust and the coppery scent of gunpowder in the air. Jake turned to Clara, concern etched on his face. "You hurt?" She touched her cheek, wiping away a trickle of blood. "Just a scrape. I'm fine." Her voice trembled slightly, but resolve burned in her eyes. Jake exhaled relief, intermingled with dread. They won't give up. Next time they might bring more men. Clara took a steadying breath. "Then we'll be ready." Jake nodded, admiration in his gaze. He quickly searched the fallen outlaw's body for clues. The man was dead, a bullet through the chest. Jake found a few dollars, some ammunition, and a torn scrap of paper with scribbled instructions, Morgan near Hastings' cabin. Finished job. $200 bounty. It bore the same star symbol from Jake's note, but crossed out. A mocking corruption of the Pinkerton sign, or a stolen piece of Pinkerton stationery. Jake's stomach churned. This is bigger than I thought. Someone's put a price on my head, and on you by association. Clara felt a surge of anger. Then we have to reach Fort Smith, find the real Pinkerton agent, and put an end to this. They covered the body with a few rocks, a brief gesture of frontier decency. Mounting up, they spurred their horses onward, hearts pounding with a renewed sense of urgency. Days bled together in a haze of wary traveling nights, spent in constant vigilance. Jake's wound throbbed, but remained stable. Clara's determination never wavered, though the emotional toll weighed heavily upon her. At last they spied the outline of Fort Smith on the horizon. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the distant hum of civilization replaced the relentless hush of the wild. Fort Smith was no ordinary frontier settlement. It was a major outpost near the Arkansas-Oklahoma border, complete with sturdy buildings, marshals' offices, and the ominous presence of hanging Judge Isaac Parker. Indeed, his reputation for swift and merciless justice preceded him, though Jake and Clara weren't certain if they'd seek him out yet. They found lodging at a small boarding house on the outskirts of town, discreetly stabling the horses. Clara insisted on taking a modest double room, though the landlady looked askance at her and Jake. Perhaps their dusty, road-weary appearance suggested more to gossip about, but Clara cared little for the woman's prying eyes. Early the next morning, Jake set out to find the Pinkerton agent who had hired him. Clara accompanied him through the bustling streets, hearts thrumming with anticipation. They reached a busy saloon that doubled as a stage depot. Jake approached the bartender, describing the Pinkerton man, an older fellow with a bristly moustache and a distinctive scar on his wrist. The bartender shrugged. "A man like that was here a few weeks ago, but he ain't been back. Heard he was meeting folks about a gold shipment. If you're looking for official Pinkerton types, you might try the Federal building down yonder." Following the tip, Jake and Clara made their way to a large brick structure, the word Federal chiseled above the entrance. Inside, after some wrangling with clerks, they found a Pinkerton detective named Horace Wentfield, tall, austere, with keen blue eyes. He ushered them into a small office, shutting the door. "How can I help you?" Wentfield asked, eyeing them curiously. Jake handed over the note. "I was hired to guard a stage carrying gold from Texas northward. We were ambushed. Everyone else was killed." This note references the Pinkerton who organized the job. He had a star symbol like yours. Wentfield studied the scrap carefully. "I do recognize this symbol. Pinkerton agents often mark documents this way. But you claim the job was sabotaged?" Jake nodded, explaining the ambush, how he'd been shot, and how Clara had saved him. Clara added her account of the ride to Broken Spur, the accusations, the bounty hunters. Wentfield frowned. "You're saying an agent put you on this job but then orchestrated a robbery?" he murmured, drumming his fingers on the desk. "Which agent?" Jake shrugged. "He never gave me his real name. Went by Gillespie. Showed me his badge. I believed him." Wentfield's face darkened. "I know a Gillespie, but he's no longer with Pinkerton. He was dismissed for corruption a year ago. Seems he might be running a racket, using the Pinkerton name to pull off heists." A surge of relief and anger rolled through Jake. "So I was a pawn in his scheme." "Likely so," Wentfield said. "He recruits unsuspecting guards like you, arranges a stage route with high-value cargo, then tips off his outlaw associates to ambush. If you hadn't survived, they'd have pinned the blame on you. That's likely why they're hunting you to close any loose ends." Clara leaned forward, a flicker of hope. "Then you can verify Jake's innocence, can't you?" Wentfield exhaled. "We can if we can catch Gillespie or those who assisted him. But official Pinkerton channels move slowly, and the local marshals may not be keen to take our word alone. There's also the matter of Judge Parker. He's thorough, but brutal. If your hometown is demanding a trial, Parker might require a hearing. If found guilty, without solid proof, a hanging is almost certain." Jake felt the weight of finality. "So how do we get proof?" Wentfield tapped the note. "If we can intercept Gillespie's next move, we can force the truth out of him. Rumor has it another gold shipment is leaving in 2 days from a bank near the Red River. Gillespie might try the same trick. If we catch him red-handed, that's your proof." Clara glanced at Jake, brow furrowed. "That means putting yourself in danger again." Jake's eyes hardened with resolve. "Better that than letting them continue. We can't live with this cloud over our heads." Wentfield nodded, a spark of approval in his gaze. "I'll gather what men I can. If you're willing to help, we might end this once and for all." 2 days later, in a dusty clearing by the Red River bank, a stagecoach waited under the scorching sun. Pinkerton Detective Wentfield stood concealed behind boulders with 2 other agents' rifles at the ready. Farther back, Jake and Clara crouched by a scrubby mesquite, hearts pounding. They'd traveled downriver with the Pinkerton men, setting a trap for Gillespie's gang, hoping to catch them in the act. Minutes ticked by each second, heightening the tension. Suddenly, a group of riders emerged from the brush. Leading them was a man with a gaunt face and a bushy mustache. Jake recognized him instantly. Gillespie. The men approached cautiously, scanning the terrain. Wentfield gave a subtle signal. The disguised coach driver hopped down, pretending to fix the harness. Gillespie and his outlaws fanned out, moving in for what they assumed would be an easy ambush. Right when Gillespie raised his revolver to signal the attack, Wentfield and his agents rose, weapons drawn. Pinkerton Wentfield shouted, "Drop your guns! You're surrounded." Panic flickered across Gillespie's face. The outlaws cursed and fired wildly. A hail of bullets tore through the scorching air. Jake and Clara ducked returning fire. Clara felt her heart slam in her chest, but she remembered the ambush at dawn and how she'd survived. She aimed carefully and fired, toppling one outlaw who charged the stage. Jake's colt barked, striking another attacker. Gillespie tried to flee, spurring his horse. Wentfield's bullet took the horse in the flank, sending it crashing. Gillespie rolled, scrambling for cover. He and Wentfield exchanged gunfire dust and rocks spraying. Finally, a well-aimed shot from Wentfield clipped Gillespie's leg, bringing him down with a scream. A few outlaws attempted to rally, but the Pinkertons closed in, forcing them to surrender. Blood and dust swirled around the battered clearing. Jake and Clara emerged from behind the mesquite, breathing hard, hearts still racing. Gillespie lay on the ground, cursing and clutching his wounded leg. Wentfield loomed over him, weapon trained. "Gillespie, you're under arrest for armed robbery, conspiracy and murder." The injured man spat, sneering up at Jake. "Should have killed you on that trail, Morgan." "Then I wouldn't be in this mess." Jake stepped forward, voice trembling with anger. "You killed innocent men, blamed me for your crimes." Gillespie sneered again, but Wentfield barked, "Shut it. You're done." He turned to Jake and Clara. "We have our proof now Gillespie orchestrated these heists under a false Pinkerton guise. He'll confess under oath or hang trying." Relief flooded Jake's face. For the first time, he saw a clear path to vindication. He gripped Clara's hand, and she gave his fingers a reassuring squeeze. They had faced death and come out victorious. Now at last they had the truth. A week later, with Gillespie and his accomplices locked in a Fort Smith jail, Wentfield prepared statements to clear Jake's name. Several Pinkerton agents corroborated the scheme. Judge Parker, stern and unyielding, took little time to declare Jake free of all wrongdoing. An official Pinkerton letter was enough to convince him. Gillespie would face the gallows. Clara and Jake, exhausted, yet triumphant, began the journey back to Broken Spur to fulfill their promise to show proof of Jake's innocence. This time the ride felt lighter, despite the lingering tension of how the townsfolk might greet them. Would Farnham Adams and Pastor Hayes relent or double down in their prejudice? They arrived on a quiet afternoon, dust swirling in the heat. A few onlookers peered from doorways as Jake and Clara rode in, heads held high. Word must have traveled of the real outlaws, but the crowd still wore skeptical expressions. Farnham Adams appeared flanked by Luther Barnes and Cyrus Tate. Pastor Hayes stood at the chapel steps, eyes narrowed in scrutiny. Jake dismounted first, brandishing the official Pinkerton letter, complete with Judge Parker's signature. Adams snatched it, scanning the words with a grim set to his jaw. Clara lifted her chin. "Jake Morgan is innocent. We promised proof and we have it." Adams ground his teeth. Slowly, grudgingly, he looked up. "Seems you were telling the truth after all. This says the man behind the stage robbery was an ex-Pinkerton agent named Gillespie. Judge Parker exonerated you." He shot Jake a look tinged with shame and defiance. "Guess we owe you an apology." Jake nodded curtly. "Just keep your men off my back." Pastor Hayes cleared his throat, stepping forward. "Miss Hastings," he said hesitantly, "we were mistaken in our suspicions. I ask your forgiveness." Clara's chest constricted with a whirl of emotions. Anger, relief, sadness at how quickly they had turned on her. But she simply replied, "I forgive you, Pastor, though I won't forget how easily you judged me." The crowd murmured. Farnham Adams stepped aside, letting Jake and Clara pass. Victory, however, was tinged with a lingering bitterness. Though the immediate threat of a hanging had vanished, the sting of betrayal would remain. Finally free of the tension, they reached Clara's homestead. The front porch was as they had left it, save for the bullet hole from that day's warning shot. Dust coated everything inside, and the goats bleated a welcome from their pen. Clara felt a wave of relief sweep over her. She was home safe, and not alone. Jake lingered by his horse, uncertain. "Well, you're back." "The townsfolk know the truth," he said quietly, trying to hide the mix of hope and sorrow in his voice. "I should probably move on, find honest work. Don't want to cause you more trouble." Clara studied him, heart pounding. In the weeks they'd spent together, she had seen his courage, his kindness, his loyalty, even in the face of a town's hostility. She reached for his hand. "Jake, you don't have to leave. I want you to stay, if you want." His eyes searched hers, breath-catching. Slowly, he stepped closer. "I'd like that," he confessed in a voice thick with emotion. In the silent warmth of that moment, with the setting sun bathing the homestead in golden light, two souls found solace in each other. Through bullet wounds and desperate accusations, they had forged an unbreakable bond. Now, at last, they could build a future together, one unshackled by fear or guilt. "Thank you for riding alongside Clara and Jake on this harrowing journey through betrayal, redemption, and the fierce resilience of the human spirit." Their story reminds us that even when gossip hisses and tempers flare, courage and kindness can prevail. Clara's unwavering compassion saved a wounded man, but it was their trust in each other that saved them both from the hangman's noose. From the ambush on the open plains to the final showdown with a corrupt Pinkerton, we've seen how a single act of mercy can ripple across countless lives. If this story captivated you, if you felt every bullet fired, every heartbreak, and every moment of triumph, then please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Help spread the word, because we all need a reminder that hope can conquer the wildest of frontiers. Thank you for watching, and until next time, ride safe and stay true.